Good morning, everybody out there in, in heart failure land. Um, I've had a fair old bit of correspondence this week from largely from over the seas in Saudi Arabia. Um, the uh, some excellent replies coming in. I was very impressed by everybody who put anything on the discussion board. And for Delphine, who said hello to everybody out in the heart failure course, I'll say hello on behalf of everybody else. Um, so this is the most curious of all the groups that I deal with, because I have to address my remarks both to the people who I see every Thursday, which feels a little bit strange, to be honest with you, because I see everyone on Thursday and then I do these little films. But then I also have a constituency which is of students on this module that I never will see at all. I mean, the only idea I get of how you people look is the little thumbnail prints that sometimes appear on the emails that I get, but I have very little idea about what it is that you look like or where it is that you work. Um, so anyway, let's move on to the discussion board. Stuff that was on the discussion board. Okay, so I asked a number of questions in I think it was the last one. I'm not sure. It I lose track because people don't answer for the week. You see, sometimes people catch up. So when I get an individual answer, I have to remember what lesson does this actually belong to. But but Rachel, for instance, sent me an interesting series of answers there. And yeah, what did you say? I've forgotten the exact. The advantage of a narrow definition of heart failure. I asked you this question, didn't I? Give us a few advantages of a narrow definition of heart failure, one which is very precise about the details of what needs to go into a diagnosis before we call it a state of heart failure. Um, and Rachel's put the advantages of a narrow definition is that it helps to treat the acute signs and symptoms associated with congestive cardiac failure, whereas a broad definition helps to know the pathological process behind the condition. Well, that's not a bad answer, Rachel. I've got to say, it's not a bad answer, but it's not really the one that I was going for. What I was going for was that if you have a very tight and narrow definition, that the ejection fraction has got to be below this number, and the brain natriuretic peptide's got to be, and there's got to be this change on the ECG, and there's got to be this sign on the patient, then what that does is it makes sure that no patient with really frank and serious heart failure ever gets missed. But it will rule out a lot of people who are kind of on the borders. So in terms of planning health service resources, it will tend to underestimate the size of the problem. Why? Because you've defined some people out of the equation. A broad definition of heart failure, on the other hand, will draw in everybody who's got the condition. Everybody and everybody and everybody. And the problem with that is that won't help you to identify who needs your services most, because there'll be a queue out of the door of people with the signs and symptoms of heart failure that need further investigation to be excluded. So there are advantages. The point I was trying to make here was that there are advantages and disadvantages to defining heart failure in different ways, But someone, somewhere must have to take account of this sort of problem as they are planning what sort of health service resources are we going to need for the next decade. Someone's got to plan this. And I really do wonder how they navigate through the difficult questions that simply defining what is heart failure throws up. Okay, left ventricular. I asked you what were the telltale ECG signs of the phenomenon called left ventricular hypertrophy, and Rachel's put here is that the ECG QRST angle is widened. There is delayed intrinsicoid deflection in V6, which she defines as the time from QRS onset to peak R is more than 0.05. Far too clever. Far too clever for me, that. That's for the advanced class. I would have been satisfied with tall R waves over the left ventricular leads V5 and V6. And here's an example of what it is that I mean. On the other hand, when she goes on to define disease prevalence and disease incidence, for instance, she defines as the incidence of a disease as the rate at which new cases occur in a population during a specified period. I can't think of a better definition of what incidence is. Prevalence she defines as a measure of the total number of people in a population who have a certain disease at a given time. Again, short, to the point, very sweet. Okay, going over the page, Delphine, excellent point. I asked you, have you ever seen a patient who's been misdiagnosed with heart failure? And she says yes, that she has seen a person in a condition like this, where people, for instance, are in renal failure and they've had too much in the way of fluid. Then they can start to get swollen. They can start to have difficulty breathing. Heart rate goes up, but this isn't really proper heart failure. This is fluid overload with renal failure. Yes, absolutely. And she gives her, again, Delphine gives a list of other conditions which might cause this problem. I'm just going to find them now. Click, and going down there it is, lesson 4. Going down the page, pulmonary embolus, pneumothorax, asthma, pneumonia, COPD, psychogenic causes, and anemia, and all these things can cause what appears, the sort of breathlessness, can all appear to mimic the symptoms of heart failure. And for a general practitioner, for instance, who has a 75-year-old with a history of coronary artery disease in front of them, the ability to be able to say, is this new onset heart failure, or is this another problem that this person's got that is representing itself as acute dyspnea, it must be really difficult for a physician to have to deal with this sort of difficult problem, and occasionally one gets missed. Well, surprise, surprise. Shirley, absolutely. Old age being a risk factor for, heart failure is unusual in the young person, because you've got to say that old age is a risk factor for the development of the condition. A risk factor associated predominantly with hypertension and myocardial infarction, which again are more common as the person grows older. The other thing that Shirley draws our attention to in the discussion board is, and everyone seems to mention this, I can't get over it considering it's such a rare condition, this Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is a condition which I only ever read in the essays of students who are on this course. It never really gets mentioned anywhere else, although I've got to tell you, the other week I saw a contribution from a paramedic in a different context, and the paramedic mentioned this condition as well, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I've never really heard of it before I started running this course, and now people do their essays on it and everything, so I don't really know how to deal with that. For the rest, I have told you that I'm seeking now to modernise up all of my online materials, and so to that end, I've made an arrangement to go and see a primary care specialist nurse. And what I'm going to get her to do is to sit down with me and talk about the management of cardiac disease in primary care. You know, giving another angle to the one that Chris Nicholson has brought forward in his excellent book. And I hope you do agree with me, by the way, that Chris's set textbook there, Heart Failure, the Clinical Nursing Approach, is a really, really good introduction to the subject. So then, collecting more and more materials as fast as I possibly can. And I don't think I've anything else to tell you. I think I'm suffering from something down there. It's making me cough an awful lot. So unless I hear from you beforehand, I shall speak to you next week. Bye.